It's great to be here. George Will, we see you there. George, Audie, and Peter. This is remarkable. All of you, congratulations. Your speeches were terrific and very inspiring. And I want to really start with Peter, what you said. What a great line, truth decay. And you said we journalists must be a line of defense against truth decay. I mean, if that doesn't sum up our jobs over the last 5 years, even more so, I would say over the last several months, I don't know what does. But my question for you, Peter, is put that into practice. How do you do that as an editor, as somebody who is, getting your troops to follow that that really important kind of battle cry for journalism when, it's not easy these days because there are a lot of people telling your readers and our viewers and listeners that we're not telling the truth, even though that's not always the case. In fact, they're the ones who are lying.
Thank you, Dana. It's a great question. And thank you for the incredible work you and your colleagues at CNN have done in fighting truth decay. And again, it's not my phrase. It actually came from Rand, and Sonny Efron, actually, who runs NPF, was instrumental in creating that phrase back when she worked for Rand. But I think part of it is, when we're in a position of leadership as journalists and as editors, the most important thing we do is create a playing field for our great colleagues to do their best work. And I have tried to be as direct and as consistent and as relentless as I can be. And I think it behooves all of us who are in journalistic leadership positions to make sure that finding the truth is whatever it might be and wherever it might lead is essential to what we do today. Our society needs it. Our readers, our audiences need it. And we just have to keep at it on a consistent basis. Some things are a little more complicated than others, obviously. Dealing with complicated issues of COVID and getting vaccinations and so on and so forth is a lot more complicated than whether a sports team is winning or losing. But the fact remains that every day, day in and day out, I need to be talking about it. My colleagues need to be talking about it. And as a vast group of journalists in all of the different disciplines and everything we do, we have to remember that that's why we're here. That's at the heart of what we do. I'm tired of the false equivalencies. I'm tired of saying, well, we got this side, we got to get that side. I mean, we always want to be fair. We always want to be complete. We always want to be balanced in what we write and report and broadcast. But at the end of the day, we have to be satisfied that we are telling the truth.
Absolutely. And Audie, how do you deal with that when you and I and everybody else in the media, all of us, have been labeled the enemy of the people for so many years now? And, when we're trying to get the truth out and get the facts out and combat the lies, make it so that we are a credible source, even though our credibility is all we have. We know that as journalists. But when you have somebody with the biggest and loudest megaphone trying to erode that, and in many cases successfully doing so day in and day out, I don't know the answer to this. I'm wondering if you know the answer to what the best way to battle that is.
I definitely don't know the answer, but I think that, we were part of the decay and we can be part of the shoring it up. Over the years, the blurring of lines between news and entertainment, the blurring of lines between analysis and opinion, there are ways that I think we let the boundaries wither. And the reason why people can criticize us, and I'm not talking about the person with the biggest microphone, but is because they hold us to a high standard and still do. And that's a good thing. When they stop caring at all, that's when we should be worried. When no one cares what we're putting on air, when no one cares how we're framing the discussion, it means that there is still a discussion, there is still a debate. And what I'm looking forward to now is seeing how people apply the lessons from the last couple of years going forward. I don't know what that will look like, but I have really high hopes that the fact that we're all talking about the work that we do in the ways that we are these days, it means that there can be some changes ahead.
Yeah, no, that would be wonderful. But, on the note about blurring lines, George, when we talked yesterday, you, as you do, and that's why you won all the awards, told us about this time and how it compares to another time in history. I believe you said it was the late 18th century, about journalism then and how we might be headed to that place again. Can you describe that?
Yes, when our party system emerged, to the surprise and I dare say chagrin of the framers, who neither anticipated nor desired a party system, when it emerged in the 1790s, the American people were voracious newspaper readers. But most of the newspapers were vociferously aligned with one party or the other. Indeed, both parties did this, but Jefferson, for example, when he was Secretary of State, would support friendly newspapers by giving them lucrative government printing contracts. What worries me is that we might have looked back upon the episode, the period in American journalism when we gave lip service to and largely tried to adhere to objective journalism. We might look upon that as a fleeting episode between the party journalism of the 1790s and early 19th century and today's journalism, which is increasingly partisan. I think the 45th president gave journalists an excuse to do what they like to do anyway. Everyone in journalism is interested in politics and interested in public policy and has opinions. Now, what we've done generally in the past is quarantine opinions. People like me who are paid to be opinionated, they put us on op-ed pages so people know what they're getting. If they don't want opinionated journalism, they can go to the sports pages. But if they want it, there it is, and it's fenced in a little bit. I think we've seen in recent years a seepage, quite a leakage indeed, of opinion into news, and a sense that newspapers are to do something to instruct people and tutor them and make sure they're thinking right. Dana, I have here today's little clip from the front page of today's New York Times. The columns 7 and 8 are two stories. Misery deepening in Texas as storm menaces the East. Mm-hmm. Beneath that is a subhead on one of the two stories. Officials, meaning Texas officials falsely hold windmills at fault. I think 10 years ago, the New York Times would not have said that, would not have said, we're going to tell people up front our opinion that what they're saying in Texas is false. Now, for all I know, what the people are saying in Texas is false. That's not my point. My point rather is that something new has happened in journalism when the newspaper or on television, people feel called upon to tell people what they should think about the facts that are about to be put in front of them. And I think that is, we're treading into dangerous territory, and I hope we'll tiptoe out of this minefield.
Well, that's interesting because and Peter, I'd like you to respond to that because the way I look at it, they're similar, but they're different. And when I say they, what I mean is opinion journalism and fact-based journalism. So, for example, you can watch or listen to conservative media, and they have conservative opinions. But these days, many of them have crossed the line into just spewing lies that the people who are aligned with them are putting out there. And so I think that is the area where a New York Times has changed definitely over the past several years to include the word falsely in there, because we have had to, as journalists, fact check real time. Certainly on television, I had to do it all the time in a way that I never did before. And that does seem to be a very new phenomenon, certainly in my career. And I think that goes not just to the both sides-ism that you say that you're moving away from, and that's a good thing that journalists in general are moving away from, but also being responsible for the truth. And, perhaps the New York Times did look at the wind situation and the wind turbine situation and fact checked it and decided that because it was false based on their fact check, they wanted to get that in there. Would you have put that word in or allowed that word to go into one of your stories?
I would if I knew we had completely vetted and verified it. I mean, I agree with George about the sort of slippery slope potential. I also think that we are in a time where the line between fact and opinion has been blurred substantially because of the growth of digital media and the ability to go to a place where your personal point of views are affirmed as compared to getting reporting and so on. So I think there's a caution there. But I also think that, I think back to, I don't know, it's probably 3 or 4 years ago when there was this canyon the media jumped over and there was a huge debate at the time about whether we can say Trump was lying, when in fact he was lying about so many different things. I mean, how many Pinocchios did he get from the Washington Post over the course of his term? So yes, we have to be careful and determined and spend whatever time it takes to make sure that if we're going to use a word, if we're going to say something's false, we better be there. We better observe it. We better have done the vetting. We better have done the digging to be able to assert that, because getting it wrong potentially has a higher penalty than in the past where we just sort of, papered over it in some fashion.
Can I just follow up on that? So let's say you're editing that story that George was just, showing us in the New York Times, and you saw the vetting and all the facts to back that up, and you put that in there. Would you insist that all of that vetting and evidence that the reporters dug up be pretty high in that story?
It's got to, yes, absolutely. And it's got to be in the story. That's one thing we don't do well enough and that we need to do more of, especially in the digital space where we don't run out of room. I mean, there's no limit of column inches in the digital space. So you can really show your work. And I think that's, and more that's occurring on a regular basis, but it's very, very important that if we're going to make, strong assertions of fact or not, that it's not, we just can't just say it. We've got to show why that's the case.
George, do you want to add to that?
No, I agree with that. It seems to me we ought to show confidence in our readers or in our viewers by saying, the Texas official said X. Other people say, and here's why other people say, why not X? And to the extent possible, not to adopt a kind of journalistic paternalism that we have to lead people on a leash to the conclusion. They'll get there if they're provided with the information.
And Audie, on that, I mean, I think one of the things that George was alluding to is, cable news outlets who have very open points of view, digital sites that have very open points of view, and talk radio that has very deliberate points of view. That has become, I don't know if it's the norm, but it has become almost accepted that people subscribe to their own sets of facts, not opinions or philosophies, but more and more facts. And, that has absolutely eroded and continues to erode the sense of comity with a T, and also just the idea that the whole country has such a deep divide, and it feels like it is getting worse, and that opinion or point of view, and sometimes not always fact-based media is making that happen, because everybody's living in their own echo chambers, and they can't rely on a Walter Cronkite every night anymore. They can't. They don't.
I think that's an incredibly interesting point, and I want to come back to something briefly that George said about how to cover a story like what we're seeing in Texas, and the idea of not leading people to facts. I do think that is kind of the job, is to present the facts at hand. If an official says that the problem is X, but it turns out that's actually not the problem, not because somebody else says it, because factually it's not it. For instance, in this case, the issue of wind turbines and that make up 13% of the power in the state. And right now, the state is not down only by 13%. It's down by a lot because the entire system has failed. That's the kind of thing that, yes, it is actually our job to point that out, or it is actually our job to say if something is false, if the actual percentages show that's not the case. As for the divided media landscape, oh, sure, go ahead.
I thought, because that's an interesting point. I just want to get George's response to that.
I quite agree. I mean, if someone says something false, the falsehood should be demonstrated. But it's one thing to put it in the headline and say, officials falsely declare, meaning what you're about to read is going to take you to that conclusion. Would it not be better to say, Texas officials said X about the wind terminals, other people, and then you quote them, you track them down, you get them, you list their credentials, and you cite their evidence. And you let your readers come to the conclusion instead of putting it in a headline that they read before they read anything else in the story put in front of them.
I think that it's hard for me to be piqued about what's on the headline of a newspaper when so few people are getting their news from a paper print newspaper. People are going to be seeing things in headlines, in feeds. It's literally called a feed thanks to social media. And the way we take in news is very different now. I think that one of the things we've learned is that a lot of this can be manipulated because of algorithms, because of the way internet media is structured. And we're still reckoning with that. It's not exactly clear how you do place context, how you do announce a fact in a way that someone will retain it. I mean, one lesson briefly that we learned during the last couple of years is that when you are trying to debunk something or insist on a fact, people actually just remember the thing that you've repeated, the thing that's false. You actually have to be careful how you say this information in terms of what people will retain. And people doubt fact checking now as a result. So I'm not saying I have the answers to these things, but I don't think it'll be solved necessarily by having such high standards or high explanation for what's in a headline, which is by definition a handful of words, and will actually be different on the website, Facebook, Twitter, will be promoted differently by your aunt who's a climate denier and your nephew who is a climate change activist. There's a lot of people in the mix now. We're not the gatekeepers, and we have to reckon with that. I don't have the answer to that, but I do know that kind of critique can only go so far in this environment.
Yeah, and Peter, pick up there because we aren't the gatekeepers as much as we want to be. And that kind of goes to my lengthy question to Audie before about the fact that people are living in their own echo chambers. So take us out of our echo chamber here in Washington, out into the real world where you are and in Michigan, and tell us what we should know as journalists from you as somebody who is covering not just political news, but news in general at a state level.
Yeah, that's such a wonderful question. Thank you. I mean, real people, if you want to call it that, out here in Michigan and so on, have a lot more going on in their lives and a lot greater concerns than, whatever's going on in the halls of Congress, not counting, of course, January 6th. But I do think that people, everything Audie said was right, but people still have a craving for understanding. And for those of us in the mainstream, whether we're here in Detroit or inside the Beltway, it's still really important that we get to the essence of what the stories are about. We have to be reporting every day information on the administration of COVID vaccinations because that's a very personal issue to people here in Michigan, like it is everywhere in the country right now. So it still brings us back to truth, I think. It's still a really essential part of what we do. But, I think we always have to be focused, too, on what matters to the people we're serving. In my case, I have a fairly mass audience, so it's a really wide question, just as it is for everybody else here having this conversation. But we have to be really conscious of what we're saying, how we're saying it, when we're saying it, and making sure that it's clear and truthful and as complete as we possibly can be.
That's a great way to end. I'm getting the wrap. I think I could talk to you all day. And George, I'm dying to know, but I'll get the answer another time, why you think the Republican Party is actually going to be emancipated from the 45th president, because it doesn't look like that's happening anytime soon. Congratulations again to all of you. You are remarkable, honors so well deserved. And I have to quickly give a shout out to my dear colleague, Sanjay Gupta, who got the MPF chairman citation. Yes, he is that awesome. He is that nice and that terrific, even more so as a colleague.